Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening here at the event and panel discussion brought to you by Boundless Leadership and the Center for Leadership and Coaching. So this discussion this evening will be an opportunity for all of us to learn and to take some knowledge from our panelists who are the experts when it comes to leadership. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marlene McConnell, and I'll be your MC for the evening. Just to get some of the housekeeping out of the way, I remember that earlier there was a mention of if this was Airlink, that we should balance the plane. So feel free to move around and also to move closer to me, to the front. You would have received a ticket, so please feel free at any time to redeem your ticket over at the bar for a drink and get a bite to eat. The ladies and the gents is just in the back to the to the right, and then the gents further and also on the right hand side. I think I've covered everything. So let's take a moment and let me introduce our panel guests for the evening. So our first guest is Christe, who is a published author of The Rise of the Warrior Leader and a prominent figure in various leadership and coaching roles. With a diverse background in military science, banking, and martial arts instruction, Claudio brings a unique perspective to leadership and mentorship. His focus on resilience and instilling a culture of leadership while setting achievable goals has led to impactful challenges and changes in his community. With a master in science from the City's University of London and a BCom from the University of Cape Town, a bachelor's in military science majoring in pure mathematics and natural science from South Africa's Military Academy, and a strong background in coaching, Claudio is well equipped to offer some valuable insights here this evening at the panel discussion. Our next panelist is Professor Nick Benedell, a renowned business advisor, international speaker, and former dean and founder of the Gordon Institute of Business Science. With over 30 years in business education, he has a deep understanding and knowledge of the dynamic corporate landscape, both in South Africa and internationally. Professor Benedell holds a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Washington, a Master of Business Administration from the University of Cape Town, and a Bachelor of Commerce from Rhodes University. He has also been recognized for his contributions, having been voted a Global Educator of the Year by the Academy of International Business in 2015. Beyond his professional roles, he engages in public initiatives and serves as a trustee of the Helen Suzman Foundation, showcasing his commitment in improving South Africa's future prospects. Thank you and welcome to both our panelists this evening. Our topics of discussion will be centered around the unshakable leadership, the big reset, a thought-provoking idea, and the building leadership DNA as set forth in the book by Claudio Christe, Rise of the Warrior Leader, The 10 Dimensions of Leadership. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to your host this evening, Crispin Swart.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlene. Well, that felt special. I was saying to Candace just now, this is very different to Zoom. Yeah. Candace, we should do this on Zoom when we... Folks, thank you so much for being here this evening and for joining us. As you gathered, this is the very first time we're doing our Leaders in Conversation in person. And we started about 2 years ago trying to create a forum and a platform and a space for leaders to connect and engage and share their collective learning. And then earlier this year, Claudio challenged us to say that why don't we do this in person? And so this is a first for us and a new experience. So we may have a few glitches as we go along, but we're learning all the time. You won't know this, Claudia, but your book was the very first read that I had this year. Well, it was my first read of the year. That sounds better. And since then, I've actually been really reflecting on, as Marlene was saying, this concept of unshakable leadership. And working with leaders and traveling, I've been looking for real live examples of what that looks like, what it feels like. What is a leadership team or a leader who says unshakable? What does that feel like and look like, as I said? And I happened to be in Kimberley earlier this week, working with a group of leaders. I'm not sure if you've been to Kimberley recently, but the municipality have now implemented what they call water shedding. So Kimberley has a double whammy of load shedding and water shedding. And the water shedding is very similar to load shedding. There's certain times of the day the taps are dry, and then there's certain times of the day that you have access to water. And working with this leadership team, I was astounded to see their grit and their determination, and this in spite of we will attitude that came through. And I thought to myself, that's unshakable leadership. So I'm really excited to explore the concept with you two this evening, and thank you for being here. Thank you for bearing with my unstructured way of thinking. And thank you very much for what you're going to add and the value you bring into the conversation this evening. Before I kick off with the first question to Claudia, I want to just read 3 quotes. Now this is going to be interesting to multitask because I want to make notes, I want to hold the mic, and I want to turn pages. But the first quote is from Marcel Goldsmith. I'm not sure if you've read his book, The Earned Life. If you haven't, please, it's incredible. But he makes this comment. The pace of change you are experiencing today is the slowest pace of change you will ever experience for the rest of your life. If we cannot keep up, we are winded and fall behind. And when we fall behind, we are living in everyone else's past. Isn't it just a profound, well, that's the reality, and we can feel it. The second quote, and I'm just giving these quotes as hooks, Claudio and Nick, for us to hook our conversation on, is from Jeanette, who said, leaders find themselves in 3 worlds simultaneously. The defined past, we know it, there's a history, we can reflect on it, we can journal on it, we can write it. The disruptive present, and then she coined an interesting term called a de novo future. In other words, it's a future that's unknown, we haven't been there, we don't know what it looks like, but we've got to be ready for it. And that leaders are finding themselves straddling these 3 realities at the same time. And then Claudio's quote, and that's the hook I want to use to get the conversation running, is Claudio makes the following statement. A case is made for a fresh approach to leadership that takes into account the unique challenges faced by today's generation, very distinct from those of the past. I think there's a common message in all 3 of those quotes around something's shifting, something has to shift, something has already shifted and is continuing to shift. And I think Claudio summed it up very nicely when he speaks about a fresh approach to leadership. So let's start there, Claudio, please. And just expand on that a bit for us in practical ways in terms of what is a fresh approach, what does it look like, why is it required? And when you coined this concept of a fresh approach, what were you thinking at that time?
Thank you, Crispin. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Loud enough. So after the military, I entered into banking in 2008 in London, which was not the ideal time. It was, in the US alone, there were 2.6 million job losses. and there's accurate statistics. So what I was seeing in leadership, on servant leadership, I saw there were limitations, because what was actually unfolding before my eyes, the companies I worked for, two major companies, Intesa Sanpaolo and Investec, which, Intesa at the time had 13 trillion rand assets, bigger than South Africa's GDP, and they outperformed the market. They didn't need a bailout. So what I saw there was principles that I'd learnt in the military, and what the literature was saying didn't coincide. So simply put, if we took a timeline from the days of the caveman, right, the early man, T0, to where we are now, 2024, and on the y-axis is physicality, or if you want to call it the great man theory, the need to be this strong Viking, the man being the leader. That was up here. But as time, especially after World War II with technology, there was the likes of Bill Gates controlling the world from their fingertips. There was no need for physicality. So the servant leadership. However, recently we saw this, the quote about the VUCA and the volatility, whereby we actually needed to return to some traits, but it's an energy we're speaking of, not this manliness, but actually the male energy is essential to tap into. So instead, the fresh approach is born from no longer seeing that as a command and control perspective. If we saw command and control and shared. So you see the poster there, ownership-driven leadership. So ownership of self, and own the mission, and own who you are, right? Own the result. So the mission is usually where people focused on leadership. And the freshest approach is that we actually need to pivot. We need to be the servant, the shared ownership, but sometimes it's essential to take it in times of a crisis and to take charge. And then the leader then releases it once the crisis is over. So that's the fresh approach, is that the command and control sometimes need to be tapped into to overcome crisis.
So I'm hearing you saying that as a leader, you use the word pivot. It's this shift of what the environment or the circumstance requires of me at that particular point, which could be, but it could be very direct in terms of decision making and that at some point, and sometimes it could be more lenient and releasing. Is that? Sorry, it's not the right English, but yeah.
Yes, and also important to emphasize that when it is direct, it's not necessarily the leader taking total charge. It could also be what the concept of team of teams, whereby for example, that's how Investec operates. It's flat, where there's team of teams, and they have the freedom to operate by knowing what they need to do, and then they've given that freedom within those parameters. And it could be, in the ideal world, individuals operating, but that could be anarchy. The concept of LiC's concept of a teal organization where everybody's empowered. In reality, that doesn't always work unless you're working for Google or creative side.
Super. Okay, thank you. Nick, your thoughts, please.
Well, firstly, hi everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me. I just want to start by congratulating Claudia. To put a finger to the laptop and write a book is no mean feat. So well done to you for doing that, taking it. I don't know Claudio very well, but I'm getting to know him. And I'm very impressed with the depth of work he's done in the book, because he's packed into it, in a sense, a review of ideas and history and literature that anyone who wants to think about leadership will find extremely helpful. What I want to say to you to start is that leadership is more of an art than a science. You learn to lead by doing. And most of us learn through bad leadership that we witness or that we do, and from good leadership. And if you're lucky, you meet people who inspire you. Inspire, as you will know, is to breathe in, inspiration. But he's packaged together some really cool stuff. And I urge you all to have a look at the material and to go on that journey. I am a strategy professor, and then later became more interested in, well, it's great ideas are one thing, but how do we get them done? And I got more interested in what I call strategic leadership. What that means is it's no good knowing where you're trying to get to unless you're able to get it done. Do it. And it's no good being able to do things unless you know where you want to get to. So that's the circle I live in, is to say, I wrote a poem once. You're not allowed to laugh because it's very bad. But it is about the subject. It said, some think and some do both, very few. It's a combination of thinking and taking action that his book, I think, taps into. So that's the first thing if I can. Strategy comes from the military, so I had a natural attraction to the warrior leader. You know, I'm very short, so I like this idea of being a warrior leader. But of course, modern leadership goes way beyond that. And unless you can enroll people and you have the personal ethic or values of service, you're not going to get very far these days. And you see the bad leaders. South Africa is littered with bad leadership and great people, like your Kimberley example. We have much better people than our leaders, I'm afraid to say. And let me say one more thing, Christe. You know, in modern life, my great-great-grandparents were produce farmers in Philippines. They were illiterate. They came in 1870. They learned to farm. They ended up in Tamboerskloof. And if I look at my great-great-grandfather, I don't know how many greats I've got to put in, but anyway, lots of greats. They did everything. They grew their own food. They built their own home. They maintained their own horses. The wife probably made their own clothing. That's not you and me. From the time we're born in modern life, we're in the hands of institutions. Your entire journey through life, whether they're schools or banks or hospitals or organizations you work for. And so the quality of the leadership is there. What I really like about what Claudio's done is mixing the service side with this inclination of the warrior, the call to take action, which is, I think, what the book speaks about.
If I may pick up on that, Claudio, please. I think the word warrior brings up certain concepts and ideas for different people, and they look at it and see it differently. Just contextualize warrior for us, please.
So the warrior goes back to the root word of the word warrior, warrier, which is French for fighting spirit. It's not running around with a spear and a shield. But in South African context, that captures a lot, because they didn't have the privilege of, let's say, missiles, so you needed to prepare the mind. And Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist, he actually said that the warrior needs to prepare wins in their mind first before entering the battlefield. So that's tapping into us every day, getting our game face on and getting ready for the day, because curveballs do happen. So in the context of the warrior, it's the steward leader is essentially a servant leader with a focus on accountability. So steward leader is not an academically accepted term. There is a push for it, but it's not accepted yet. But all it is focused on accountability. And in the event, the focus is on empowering as well. So then when something does go wrong, people actually trust you as the leader to take charge. And in fact, it's expected to step up, to get rid of the problem. And then once it's eliminated, give us the power back. Don't cling on as a dictator.
Are you able to share an example of that, where you've actually seen this play out, or could reference a particular leader that's...
Sure. So in the case of, I had this conversation with the academic in 2019 about the need for the warrior, and we didn't see eye to eye, but because it said that's not how things work. And then we had COVID 2020, and we had the Coronavirus Command Council, which no one expected, which is what I was trying to say, is that in a crisis, it's not business as usual. In fact, in the worst case scenario, let's say in the military, if you're in a trench, there's a grenade, everybody will be looking at each other and say, okay, who's going to take one for the team? Somebody's expected to save all of us. And in business, it's not necessarily that extreme, but there's still, if there's deadlines to be met, your boss may expect you to work an hour after 5 o'clock, taking one for the team. So that's how, in tough times, we're still the same person, but we show up differently. And that's okay, because everything is contextual, and realizing that servant leadership is a peacetime model. That's the point. Is that one of the dimensions is voluntary subordination, where I'll let you feel empowered and I will wash your feet because I relinquish my status. But in bad times, people will be looking to you and say, can you not step up, please, leader? And that's the warrior.
Nick, I see you want to come in here.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful.
Mm.
I mean, the question I would put, so I talked earlier about institutions will shape your life. They'll either create value or destroy value. Let me ask you this question. Do you think South Africa is in a crisis? In 2015, after 3 weeks of holiday, I was doing a session in Stellenbosch, had a group of similar size, and I asked them, do you think we're in a crisis? Do you think we're on our way to a crisis? Or do you think there's no crisis? And I've been asking that every January since. That's a long time ago, 9 years ago, 8 years ago. I think we're in a crisis. If I look at South Africa's overall situation, we're in a crisis. And that requires decisive leadership. And I love what he's saying about accountability, because the steward leadership is to say, I accept a portion of the responsibility for the outcome for all, for the whole thing. Because that's where the buck stops. I remember someone described being a CEO is like moving from business class into the cockpit. So you might be a senior executive in marketing or HR, and then suddenly you've got the controls of the plane. Then you find out how to fly the plane. It's only when you've got that fulcrum, that point of ultimate responsibility, that then you take on. This is where narcissism comes from in leadership, because narcissists believe they are going to fix everything. But when you've got that point of accountability in battle or in business or in religion, then you say, I will take responsibility for the outcome. It's what you describe. And that takes, I'll share this last thought if I can, Christe.
Sure.
That takes, many years ago, I listened to Jim Collins, and I went to hear him speak, and he talked about a window and a mirror. I've changed it slightly to a map and a mirror. All leaders need a map and a mirror. The mirror is for who are you, really? And I found myself on a flight once coming back from Amsterdam in the galley, in the toilet, and I looked in the mirror. It was 3 in the morning. I was completely exhausted, and I looked and I said, who the hell are you actually? Really, who are you? What are you? What do you really stand for? What would you fight for? And this country has given me a life way beyond my imagination. I'm prepared to fight for it. So it draws out in me the time we're in, where we are not doing what we should be doing for our people. An instinct to fight for the country that has given us so much. And I think many people like me are feeling this thing. This can't go on like this. This requires decisive leadership, because the score is not good at half time. So the map is where are you and where do you want to go next? But the mirror is who are you and why are you in the room? Most people I know have jobs. Don't have a job. Throw the job description away. Have a role and answer why are you in the room. And I think you talk a lot about that in your book.
Sure. I just want to pause there for a minute. I just love this mirror map image. I mean, there's sometimes I don't even want to look at myself in the mirror for whatever reason. And
very shocked a good-looking
yeah.
guy like you. But I can look in the mirror. You certainly can.
But it really reminds me of I think something that's really fundamental, and that is that I need to be grounded. And I want to come to the point of unshakable, please, and hook onto that. Because unshakable for me means I'm grounded, I'm settled, I'm anchored in something, whether it's my values or my purpose. But I'm okay with me. I can actually look at myself in the mirror, and there's this poem, The Man in the Mirror. I'm not sure if you know it. The fact that we're saying to ourselves and we're acknowledging in a way that we are a nation in crisis. I would imagine is also true if we say we have many organizations in crisis, but many systems in crisis, our ecosystems in crisis. And I agree with you that it does require then decisive, and maybe I'm not right, but let's say it's decisive or unshakable leadership, if I can connect those two concepts. Claudia, just take Unshakable forward for us. And what does it look like? I mean, if I'm saying it requires, our reality at the moment requires a kind of leadership that's decisive, that's bold, that can look in the mirror and has a clear map. And I think you're calling it unshakable leadership in your book. Just unpack that for us, please.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is I explained earlier about that steward leadership, that decisive point when you need to step into warrior mode, and people trust you because you've built up that goodwill during the good times or business as usual. However, those tough decisions, you could get it wrong, and the leader also needs to realize that that could end your career, because you're not being popular, making difficult decisions, but your intention is selfless. So you remain unshakable because your why is in alignment. Your intention is beyond the self. Your interests are not aligned. Your interests are the collective. So the first thing you'll see there, that usually on the ownership triad, the focus on leadership is typically the how. What do you need to do? How are you going to achieve? That's the mission. But often ignored is your character, where that is your darkness, your shadow, all the things you try to deny, suppress, you hide from people. When you're under stress, that comes out and everybody can see it. And we often do not undertake that journey of self-reflection and going into that dark space and our shadow, all our insecurities. So that requires that unshakable is to also, you say, look in the mirror and not only say, oh, I need a haircut, but say, I need to work on those issues, or I need to, because we've all got it. No one goes through life without scratches and bruises. And Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, he said, I'm going to use the word man and not person because that's how he said it. You know, a crisis does not maketh the man, as you say. A crisis reveals what's already there. So that inward journey.
I recall earlier this, what is it, Jeanette? Where's Jeanette? I just wanted to confirm that. Last year we ran a leadership initiative or leadership day with a group of high school learners out in Somerset West. So they were grade 10, 11 and 12 from the surrounding schools in the Somerset West area. And we were each assigned a table, and there were young leaders at each of our tables, and I had 6 boys at my particular table. And the theme was leadership and what they struggle with as young leaders in their reality. And bullying and all those things came up in the conversation. But there was one young man, his name was Levi. Levi didn't say a word. From the beginning, right, he didn't say a word, he just sat there. And after a break, when we reconvened, I said to them, so guys, this whole morning is about leadership. What is it? In your words, what is leadership? And there's one young man that said, or brave enough to say, sir, I don't know. And then Levi said something for the very first time. He said, sir, for me, and I don't know why they called me sir. I'm not in the military. But he said, sir, for me, leadership is character. And he blew me away. And now we're coming full circle to that right now again. That leadership is character. So now I actually want to throw the ball your way, please, Prof, if I may. Are we doing enough in terms of our executive education, our leadership development programs, and the work we're doing in that space, whether it's internal within organizations, their training and development departments and that, or whether it's institutions and training service providers? And Claudia, after Nick, I'd like your thoughts, please. This is not prep, this is just something that's come up now. Are we doing enough to equip leaders with character, leaders who are unshakable, and can respond to the crisis that we're experiencing at the moment?
That's a very important question. I think you can never do enough because of 2 fundamental reasons. The one is the world doesn't need your permission to change. And so the world I learned to manage in and later to lead in no longer exists. So if you don't have the intellectual and emotional courage to understand how the world is changing, then you can never really make the right decisions, and you can't inspire others to follow.
Sure.
But the other is the internal characteristics, internal character. So I'm running a program here in Cape Town where we start with Plato and Socrates, because the greats have agitated and thought about these issues for, we use this material. So character, as you said, absolutely right. It's easy to pretend until the gunshots go off, and then your character is on display. And you're right, I always have said it this way, my faults, which have been consistent, the best you can do with those is shrink wrap them, put them in your backpack. But one day they'll reappear, and they normally appear in a crisis. And I would argue the rate, Alvin Toffler wrote this brilliant book in 1979, believe it, not 1879, 1979, called Future Shock.
Yeah.
And he predicted, he said, the rate of change will be so high that individuals and institutions and countries will really struggle to handle it. Because the half-life of everything changing is to speed it up. So many people feel very unstable. Look at the identity crisis. Look at young people all over the world are really struggling with who they are. They've never had it so good. They've never been so anxious. Youngsters in their 20s, I can see them, they're really struggling. Whereas for my time, it was fairly obvious what to do. The country had to get changed. So character is absolutely central, and the endless exploration and curiosity to say what's changing and what does it mean for me, for the team, for the organization, for the industry, for the country, whatever level you want to think about. And I'll just say one more thing. All of us, I think, shy away from worrying. We worry endlessly as South Africans about the country's problems, and we do very little to fix them. And I love your story of the 6 kids, because those kids probably went away with something absolutely powerful for the rest of their lives. I remember being in New York once with my boss in the head of Mobil Oil, and he put his arms around me. He said, "This is Rome." I went to Rhodes. They didn't teach us what Rome was at Rhodes. I thought, what on earth did he mean? And it took me a whole night to go back to him. I said, "Oh, you mean this is the center of the world?" He said, "Yes." And what I've learned since then, all my life, is find a room with a view. And if you're scared of going where the action is, then overcome that fear. Go to it. All military commanders, he'll tell you, all great generals go to the point, the decisive point of the battle. That's what leaders do. That's what businesses do. They go to where the action is.
Sure.
And so linking the two. The one is very personal, the courage, the curiosity to go where the change is occurring and not to run away from it. And secondly, then a leader's job is to build an institution. Maybe later we'll talk about what is an institution, because modern life, as I said, is dominated by institutions. We need to really change the way we run our institutions. But this is endless. There's nothing unique about South Africa. This has happened 1,000 times in history. It just happens to be our time. I'll give you one last thing if I can. When the parliament burnt down, I was up on the mountain. I wept. I wept because I went to parliament when I was 14. A friend of mine's father was an MP. And the second day, I lost my temper, because then it truly burnt down, because the fire engines couldn't get to it.
Sure.
It's an institutional disgrace. That is the mother of our political system, the physical representation. From the terrible days of colonization, right through apartheid, through Mandela's time. And to see that burn, enough to make me very upset. And we have to fix that. Sorry to go on so long.
100%, and I think there's a really important call to action. I'd like you to help us now hook that, please. And you've referred to the model on the banner there, which is the owner continuum. Yeah? Ownership continuum. Which I think brings together everything we've been speaking about in terms of character and ownership and accountability and decisiveness. I'm happy for you to bring it closer if you want to, but would you just unpack that for us,
Sure.
please? And and just maybe use that as a hook to hook our conversation onto, because at some point I'm going to open up the floor for you to meet and chat with each other and ask us questions as well, please. So yeah, please, if you wouldn't mind just hooking that to that model, because I think it gives us a nice descriptive picture of what we've been speaking through.
Can you all see that model? So you said the ownership, where we focus on ownership, is owning who you are first, before you undertake the mission, and then owning the results. So that's building a no-blame culture. That's what I didn't touch on that previously. So if we get it wrong, we don't start pointing fingers at each other, because we'll never have 100% agreement in decisions. But when there's a consensus, we stick together and we go forward. No backstabbing. So in the mission, this is the continuum about total ownership, the warrior, and shared. So that's on the top. I'm just going to stand up. Mission. And usually people just focus this on leadership, as mentioned. But the culture needs to support it, and you, part of the culture, you're the leader. So you feed off. But although there's 10 dimensions, very simplistic is to look at it in 3. All these 10 dimensions, in fact, I've plotted most.
Press the pause button there, please.
Yes.
Because you've already, sorry, I'm just going completely rogue here.
Yes.
You mentioned one of the dimensions earlier. What was the one you mentioned? It was giving up my authority or something. Was it voluntary?
Voluntary subordination.
So here they are. So maybe while you're looking at that.
So not to go into those 10, but to make it in 3, because most leadership models, I've actually tested this, can be categorized into these 3. And the story which I'll share is Moshoeshoe. He's the father of the Sotho nation, and his grandfather Pete was eaten by cannibals. So with time he got stronger and stronger. From a small clan he built up a nation of Sotho today, Lesotho. And he went to the cave of these cannibals, and he put raw meat outside to lure them out. As soon as they came out, he surrounded them, and he could have finished them off. But he said, this is going to stop now. Here's land, I'm going to give you land, I'm going to teach you how to grow, and you're going to eat food, cattle and agriculture, and you're going to accept me as your king and our values. Do you accept? Just those 2, and then you're in the tribe. They accepted. If not, then they would have been finished off probably. But he showed us compassion, fellow human beings, and built a nation. So now these 10 dimensions, the first thing, what is your intention? So although leadership, say public speaking, charisma, all that, but if your intention is not good, you're going to become a manipulator. You can use that to do bad. So first, in the Tswana, Batopele, or depending where you are in Africa, South Africa, Batopili, which the Mandela administration brought in. The second is people have got to see that you're a good guy. If you have a smear campaign against you, it's not going to help. Or if you're a bad communicator or your right-hand man doesn't support you. So that's essentially Ubuntu, where the humanity in me sees the humanity in you. And then third being, that must be towards a goal, not just a milkshake, but improving people's lives, taking them up Maslow's. Injongo, as they say in Zulu. So those are the 3. But in towards the goal, sometimes you need to tap into the warrior in the tough times. And that's how they all fit in. But the end result is inspiring people to take ownership and to live an ownership-driven life. So the top of Maslow's pyramid, empowering people, the knock-on effect.
I'm going to pause there again, if you don't mind, because since reading the book, I've actually, as I said, even around my Kimberley example, I look out for these 10. I try and see if I can actually see it, and they are there. So I'm just going to run through them quickly. Authentic self. I think I get that. It's that mirror. It's me. There I am. I kind of get covenantal relationship, the ability to be really, I contract with you. The word covenantal is actually quite powerful. I just think of Old Testament. There's a covenant, and that shall not be broken. You enter into a marriage, it's a covenant. So I like this covenantal relationship, because I was so impressed when I worked with this team in Kimberley on Monday. The leader of the leaders, actually, all he was meant to do was welcome everybody. But he didn't do that. He said, good morning, welcome. And then he said, here's my commitment to you. He was doing this, covenantal relationship. I'm committing to you as my team, whatever that was. transforming influence. I want that one unpacked, please. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Voluntary subordination you mentioned just now. Maybe we can unpack that a bit. Responsible morality. I think that's part of our crisis. And that's maybe a contributor to that. And then you brought in something that I really would like us to spend a minute or two on, please. And it's this transcendental spirituality. And the question is around, is there a spirituality to leadership? And how does that look like? And what is that? Resilience, I think we get. Ownership, you've had there. Courageous, selfless action, that's the servant leader component. And then you've mentioned a few times accountability. So help me just, or for us, just transformational influence. How does that happen? How do leaders influence? Can I teach somebody to influence? And what are your thoughts on transcendental spirituality? But before we dive into it, maybe a step back. Why these 10? Where did they come from? How did you get there? And what do they look like in an organization? What do they look like in a leadership team? So you can either just dive into one or two of these, as we mentioned, or you can just position these 10 and then dive into one or two specifics, please.
Sure. So where they came from, there's this academic which I hold in high regard called Sanjaya. He's currently in Singapore. And in his work, he talks about the 6 dimensions of servant leadership. And essentially, the one dimension about voluntary subordination is limited to peacetime because, as I mentioned earlier, in peacetime, the leader cannot act Gandhi, where you are almost subservient to your people, to hold them high. In a wartime or in tough times, that's not what people want. So that's the additional dimensions. Orca forms the acronym Orca, like a killer whale. And the 6 is arises. So it's time for the Orca to arise. And where this came, if you look at VUCA, you're familiar with volatility, unstable, chaotic, and ambiguous. Now there's also Barney in 2020, Jamie Casho. But guess what? There's also Tuna and RUT from Oxford University and Centre for Creative Study. They've all come up with their own acronyms. So even now, we say that we are in a state of disruption, but even our acronyms are being disrupted and creating confusion. And I don't see that as progress. I'm thinking, why are you creating another acronym? You're confusing everybody. Now everybody's got to catch up. We're not talking about the latest car, we're talking about the latest acronyms. So I thought, what is actually driving the acronyms? Let's just focus on what we need. And that forms the acronym. One more, RUST, R-A-S-T. If you take all those acronyms and you plot them, RUPT, Tuna, VUCA, the R for resilience satisfies them all. A, agility, adaptability, agile thinking. And the S is stability through systems thinking. And the T, transparency, applying a triage. So you've got all these things we need to tackle, right? The triage in hospital. You need to prioritize. In your mind, you really need to apply, okay, what am I going to do first? Otherwise, we're going to be overwhelmed with a massive endless to-do list. So that's where the warrior came in. And the warrior energy is characterized by resilience in undertaking, but realizing that you need to take total ownership, which could be unpopular. And that's followed by taking courageous action, which is selfless in nature. You're not doing it, your intention is honored and selfless. And then accountability of unintended consequences is realizing you could get it wrong and you could upset people by, as they say, kicking, you know what, but also that you could get kicked because you get it wrong. And that means that your perks and your status can come tumbling down. But that's the deal for leadership.
LiC, I'll come back to you now, but just talk me through transforming influence, please, and this transcendental spirituality. And then Nick, I'd like to hear your thoughts around spirituality in the same conversation as leadership and bottom line results and that.
So my bunkmate in the Navy, his father was a very well-known senior officer and highly respected. And he was asked once in class, what does a leader do? And he said, leaders inspire. and everybody thought it was the greatest answer. And he even put it on his bunk. You could open it, you could put personal things there. And he wrote, "Leaders inspire." Because just to remind you that I was the one who came up with that. I was very proud of that. But that's essentially only one dimension of leadership, to inspire. But the important thing is it needs to have a transformative effect. That's just simply put, it has to have a positive effect, because I can negatively influence you and turn you into a gangster, or I can positively influence you and become a role model. And that's just essentially, because we're all absorbing energy from each other. Social media, what you see, we don't only absorb from what we eat, but from what we see and we hear. That influences our mind and our mental state. When you put things out there, somebody's consuming it on social media, realizing that, are you putting guff, or are you having a positive impact on somebody who's digesting your material? So that's essentially
beautiful. Nick, these 10 dimensions, I'm sure you must have come across many of these models and dimensions and acronyms.
Of course. I mean, leadership, there must be 20,000 books on leadership, all of which probably add some value. But I really like what Claudio's done, because if you read the book, he's drawn on the wisdom of the ages, but made it very contemporary. And I think this framework, we could have 15, as he says, it doesn't matter. Work your way through these as you said you're doing, keeping an eye out. Spirituality, it's a very interesting question. As I said earlier, when there's a crisis, your personality will come out. I remember I worked for a terrible boss once, and everybody disliked him. And he was the only one that didn't know that he was disliked. We all can see leaders, they when they're not looking, they give away the signals. It's such an intimate thing. And I suppose, let me say two things about it. Your spiritual values, I don't mean religion, but your spiritual values have got to come from the mirror. And I got taught, I have a very lovely sister who's very wise. And a couple of times I've had difficulties and I just can't tell what must I do. And she always says the same thing. Do what's obvious. If you have to think about it too much, it's not the right thing. And do the mother test. What would your mother say? What would your mother say? That's all you need for ethics. And when you have the responsibility of the leader, it's to take on the burden that you'll share with the others, but you are the primary person, then you better be doing it for the right reason. And that comes from reflection. And I think all of us learn this, right? We learn it in this kind of conversation. This is not a conversation of doing, it's a conversation of reflecting. But my sister taught me, at the end of a day, I was quite young running a company, and I was really taking a lot of strain, and I would get home so exhausted I wouldn't get out the car. I just put the seat back for 10 minutes to try and recover from the day, largely because I didn't know what I was doing. And I would sit in the car, and she taught me to meditate in this way. She said, reflect on the day. What do you mean? She said, revisit in your mind's eye what you did well or not well. And don't worry about the things you don't do well. Just observe yourself doing what you shouldn't do. That's all you do. You don't lash yourself, you don't beat yourself up, because that takes you to a negative space. Just observe it. And you know what I found? It's so interesting, Crispin, is over and over I repeat the same mistakes, but slowly by reflecting on it, it just gradually moved away. Most of them you can shrink. But also look at what you did do well and think about that. And Peter Drucker taught me in his great writings, know what you're really good at. It's a big thing with us. Wrote a great article called Managing Oneself. Know what you're really good at. And know what you're not so good at. And if the weakness is critical, fix them. Like I started out, used to be late for meetings. And on my third day at work, my boss was standing outside my office with his watch. And I was never been late again. He was a tall guy. So, if you've got a critical weakness, fix it. But the slightly below average things, ignore them. Do what makes you perform, do well, and do more of that. This is a spiritual question in the broadest sense of knowing who you are. And I'm repeating myself, why you're in the room. Why have you come today? Why are you here?
Yeah.
Thinking about that at the end of the day, I think for me is a powerful way of tapping into what you wrote about.
Thank you. You want to add to that?
Yeah, and it is a long word, transcendental spirituality, but 2 years before Maslow passed away, they found paperwork that purpose, he actually added transcendence on the tip of the pyramid. And Stephen Covey's 8th Habit of Highly Successful, the 8th Habit.
Yeah.
Only the third time that I read it did I actually really understand, because it's not an easy read, I didn't find. Not because it's difficult, because I find it a little bit boring. But essentially, you climb up Mount Everest, and you challenge yourself and you achieve, but instead of continuously waving the flag and posing with photos, you then look around and say, okay, who else is trying to climb up Everest? And you give back and you let them achieve as well. That's in a nutshell transcendental spirituality.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor now, but before I do that, I found extreme value in these 10 dimensions. And I know you were irritated with me at one time, because that's all I wanted to speak about. and because they are, I think, so profound. And if I don't answer your question, what's missing in our leadership at the moment? It's this. You can call them different things, but these building blocks, I think, is what's significantly missing. And that's why we may be in the state we're in, corporately and socially and all of that. So I know we just got it up there and we haven't defined it in great detail. But if there's one thing I could take out of your book, it was this. And you and I had a conversation the other evening around, are these measurable? What would they look like in an organizational context? And can we see them and assess them and measure them? And maybe that's a conversation for another day, but I think you're onto something here, really profound. You don't need me to say that, but I really just wanted to acknowledge that. So folks, what we'd like you to do, we're going to give you 10 minutes.
Can I say one thing about that? So as I've studied life and history and philosophy, not everything has to be measured, but you will know.
And that's
knowing doesn't have to be measured.
How do we know?
You don't have to quantify these things. You know the truth.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
true.
just wanted to add that.
No, that's really, that's valuable. That's true. Cool. So just swirl around and form little small groups, please. And what we'd like you to do is just share with each other what you've taken out of this conversation up to this point. Your thoughts on that model there, or any questions you may have on it. Your thoughts on these 10 dimensions and any questions you may have on it. Or any other questions or comments you'd like to raise, and then we'll give an opportunity for Nick and Claudia to respond to that, and then we'll start wrapping up. So just find just form little huddles, please. Introduce yourselves if you haven't yet. And so let's just repeat that. What are some of your takeouts of this conversation? What are your thoughts on these 10 dimensions? Any questions or comments you have on what we've been sharing up to now, please? Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Joss, you done? You need another hour, but let's just. What did Nick say? Don't overanalyze it. Don't overthink it. All right. Can we start with this group? Siondo? Just your general reflections, thoughts, comments, and then any questions that you may have for Nick and Claudio from your group, please.
Thanks so much, Christe. I was delegated by the team to provide some insights specifically on those 10 dimensions of leadership. So what we discussed was that there are 2 points that we discussed. The first one was that it's really interesting to observe that there is a team or a group that can get things right And the question was, how do they do it? How do they get it right? Then we also discussed number 3, which is the transformational influence, whereby Claudio indicated that the influence might be positive or negative. It depends really on that leader. So when a leader is wounded and has this negative, or not negative, but wounded, the way he leads or she leads will reflect. The same applies when a leader is healed and is leading from that space of healing, then it will manifest. But now as followers or as your team, how are you able to discern between what is not right and what is right? Because then this leader is wounded, but now how do you discern? How do you decide what is right or what is wrong about this leader without judging the leader? Because a leader might not even know that they are leading from this space.
Yeah.
But how do you, as a follower or as a team member, identify those traits, negative traits, and how do you kind of show the blind spots? Because as leaders we also have blind spots, but now how do you show your leader that this is your blind spot without being victimized? Because when a leader is wounded, they can also victimize you from speaking up and showing them their blind spots.
Sure.
I don't know if you've got any, Lindy. I think you had a
No, what I was just maybe saying is that it would actually be very important also to reflect. I don't want to to reflect both as people who are leading and people who are being led, and also have that real check in terms of saying what works. If we have this team where we even thought about, if we look at our World Cup win from our rugby, you know, yes, you triumph, but after that excitement, do we really have a point of reflection to say that how did we really get there? And what can we take from that to other areas that require that? And then when we look at the point of leading from being wounded, to say what is actually required to heal that? You know, is there a space in which where we need to come in terms of develop and start a healing process so that we can actually first acknowledge, and what we also said, then, you know, there mustn't be an ego also, because there must be that reality check that I am wounded. Self-realizing and others realizing, and together coming up with a program to say, how do we heal from that and move forward for the benefit of the good of all?
Thank you. Sure. Just generally, any comments on that from yourself, Claudia and Nick? But before I say something, really, I just this whole thing about healing and woundedness is resonates, and I'll tell you why now. 2 episodes from now, so I'm going into April, we're going to have a Leaders in Conversation with a person who's just gone through, he was a whistleblower and has just gone through Zondo Commission and come out the other side, and in the process was broken and wounded. And he's going to tell his story of healing and recovery and rediscovery of who he is as a person and as a leader. I think what you're saying around wounded leaders, there's a lot more of that than I think we understand or even are aware of or acknowledge. Thank you. That was a beautiful, thank you. Any comments on that from you before we're just going to sum up at the end for us?
No, sure. Another analogy, thank
Yeah.
you. Sharing a container, if your mind is your container and you create it watertight so don't have any leakages of things that we can use.
Yeah.
And we need to get this container tight before we can enlarge the container and hold the space for others in leadership with the organization or team. So get that first container right before the leakages that can then filter through. We can't hold the space.
Thanks, Carly. Just any comments, thoughts from your group, please? Pitch, are you the?
Yes. I don't know, is it on?
It is.
Okay. Thank you. We've discussed a number of things, but there's also a few things that I want to mention. And I first just want to say, in terms of what the Prof said about this person, he's the only one that doesn't know people, doesn't like him. I know of an instance where a person was also like that, and then he died. And then there were hundreds of people going to his funeral. And then the boss, big boss, that always thought so well about this guy, but later on, after he died, people came forward and talked about it. He said, "No, I don't believe you. How is it possible that so many people come to the funeral if you say nobody liked him?" And then the person said, "Yes, but I came to make sure he's not back at work." So that is the one thing. So be careful if you look at a funeral and there's so many people. So I would like to have very few people at mine. Okay, just a few observations also, and we've discussed some of the things as well, but if we talk about unshakable leadership, although I don't like the word in the context of leadership, but we're actually talking about resilience. Because resilience, we talk about that flexibility is spring. You know, we talk veerkrachtigheid in Afrikaans. So that's what I think, the leadership is there, and then it goes into this turbulent environment, like a plane that hits some turbulence, and then we stabilize again, and they carry on. Just something to think about. Then I want to say, in general, there's something wrong with leadership in the world. We're not the only people that is having a leadership crisis. Look at the US, look at the UK, look in Britain, look in Russia. And, just to say, we're not in isolation. Actually, I think the problem is with leadership. And I think the time is ready now for something alternative. To take all the good things that will work in a new context and maybe add some new things to it as well. Leadership is more an art than a science. That is true. Then we also said, made a comment to say, one of the most difficult things when we talk about authentic leadership is when a person work in an environment where you get punished for doing the right thing. I think if you look at the Zondo Commission, we actually refer to state capture here, and you mentioned now, how many of those people, weren't punished for doing the right thing? And how do you maintain yourself? Be your authentic self. You know what is right and you know what is wrong. And then there's a phenomenon that most probably you become aware of it in the leadership environment as well, where you get kind of organizational Stockholm syndrome. I don't know if you know the Stockholm syndrome. That's when people get taken hostage, and then the people start to associate with the hostages. They will even, the hostage takers, and they will even warn them when they realize that the police want to come and release them. That's the Stockholm syndrome. And there's people that is in leadership positions, and then they get confronted and they must do the wrong thing. And then from that perspective, they later on believe that they're doing the right thing. Initially, they wouldn't have wanted to do that. Then just something interesting, warrior. Yeah, you explained it very well. We had consensus here in terms of when you indicated where it's about the spirit, but people don't always understand it. And it's also about, don't we talk maybe about a go-getter? In layman's terms, a warrior leader is a go-getter that go out and they fight for what they want. Then also, we talk a lot now, but also we said something about, I say we because I don't want to take responsibility myself. Then, let me take leadership. I'll take one for the team. Sorry that I talk so much what they said. You know.
You wanted to? I was going to say, voluntary subordination. Give the mic to someone else.
Yeah. I've just identified the volunteer that will carry on.
One more minute.
Decisive, thank you. I catch. Decisive leadership is needed. Somebody made a comment. Yes, we agree with that. Then beware of the dark side. How do you become aware of the dark side? You mentioned earlier on, go for coaching. It's one thing to get confronted with the dark side. If you know what it is, you can do something about it. And you can react to that. Then just lastly, leadership is one of the things that most people in organizations talk about, but the least is done about it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any thoughts, comments, or are you going to reserve till the end?
Let's wait and hear more.
There's that team at the back. Yeah, let's get to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dietmar. We can't really talk about what we discussed because we had so little time in a way. The same time as you had, but so a couple of things came up. There are a couple of keywords which are absolutely true, but you've got to see them in the context wherever you are in the company, in an organization, institution, universities. And you write a book, you got 10 dimensions there, that's great. You read another book, you got another 10, another 5, as you also elaborated. The problem that I see in leadership that isn't there is the culture. Because you've got to start a culture. Now, I'm a technocrat, I'm completely nerdy, okay? But when I got into management, the first thing I saw is that my toolbox is empty. And I had to learn afresh. But I had a boss who was a good leader. And I watched, and through watching, I learned a lot of things. I made my share of mistakes. Sorry, I didn't want to talk just about me. But we said so little. You get the microphone just now, right? But I think 2 points maybe that I learned over the years in that regard is that leaders have to have the right knowledge of where they are, and it doesn't have to be at the top. It can be anywhere in the organization. But they must have insight, whole sight, and future sight. If that isn't there, all these other guys can just run around and do a task, but there is no leadership. And in the end, we are all leaders at our respective levels. When I speak to a young person, and they say, but you know, my boss is this, that, and the other, I say, don't worry about them. You worry about where you are and what you do and the culture in your little team. Maybe it's only 2 or 3 people. But I also come from the flying fraternity, and there is a word called airmanship, like you get in seamanship. And leadership would be nice, because anyone can get a pilot's license or a sailing ticket, but very few people display airmanship and sailmanship, or sailorship. What is it called? Seamanship, thank you. Yeah. And we talk also about the difference about management and leadership, and maybe you want to take over.
Looks like there's another contribution. Yes?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try and sum up, because the nice thing about it is that I was very observant and listening to all the speakers. I think I think out of the 3 dimensions, one thing that we touched a lot about, which Jan also shared, is just more about the empowering. And I think it speaks a lot about the transformational influence. I think the leader now going forward that will have great leadership skills, it's not only about the command and rule, about the whole dimension of actually transferring people. Another thing one of the people in the group also shared is that you know, what's nice about it is that when you're talking about transformational influence, which is spoken about in the book, it doesn't only mean that one person is gaining the leadership skills. It means that you're empowering more than one person, and then which also talks to that you are actually getting them to voluntarily be subordinate to you. Because remember, if you empower one person to have leadership skills, then all of them leave with one thing. So I think that's one of the 10 dimensions that we feel that this book touches on everything. And also another thing that we also shared was about the responsible morality. I think as a leader, the same thing that happens, that you can either take flight or fight. As a leader, you have the responsibility. In case something happens, you should be able to take charge. So I think those are things that we spoke about. And another thing that also one of the guys shared about is that there's a big difference when it comes to having a manager and a leader. And I think we've covered that. So I think what we've all kind of picked up is that yes, there's a crisis, but then how do we implement the leadership? So I think the book, those are the 3 things that we kind of touched on too.
Beautiful, thank you. Great, thanks. And then there's Roger, on your side. You were a group of 4 or 3.
I'll take one for the team now.
That's coming through.
So, if I sum up, and excuse me if I don't sum up everything well, we had a lot of discussion here. But the first thing that came out, and you mentioned it so well, Claudia, you brought up examples from the beginning of history, some local cultural examples. And what came out for me for that is that leadership can be transcendent and it can't be transferable and it can't translate to different cultures, to different people. And we've got a lot of examples that we can learn from. The other thing is and I think we spoke about the concept of the plane sitting in business class and then getting into the cockpit. And it's one thing to get in the cockpit. There's a lot of people that can get in the cockpit. But when the plane starts shaking and things get really rough, that's when the character comes out. And I think you mentioned characteristics. And character, you can go look in the dictionary and get a definition for character. But it's so there's so many things actually that define character, so many characteristics that define good character, and that's when it comes out, when that plane starts shaking. So there's one way to get there, but true multidimensional leadership is being in that cockpit and able to steer that plane in that scenario. And then the multidimensional aspect was another thing. I think if I think of leadership in my own view, maybe it's because of lack of memory, but I try to define it to 3 things. And looking at that and listening of the examples that Prof and Claudia gave, it is so multidimensional, and we need to be open to learning and taking in everyday lessons and experiences of others. And you brought up coaching, to see that multidimensional thing. It's not just 3 things. It's not just inspiring. It is multidimensional. So keeping eyes open, ears open, learning adds to that. So I hope team I summed it up.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you. That was really rich. Claudio, Prof, just your thoughts and comments and just something you picked up and like to just reflect on?
Sure. So you speak about the characteristics, the own who you are.
Yeah.
Right. The bottom left, and then so in the mission, and that's essentially those 10 dimensions. You could see those as competencies, and the bottom left as the character. But overlaid with all those 10 competencies is caring. So you've got to care. That's the batopele or batopili, and some more than others. So that also speaks to a lot from what I heard is how do we get people to have that intent about increasing caring. But the good thing is that although, just to add something positive, is that does violent movies cause violence? Hollywood have come up with research which says it doesn't. Of course they will, right? Economics. It's profitable for them. But we all know intuitively when we get desensitized to something,
it's easier to do it. The neural pathways in the brain are created. But the recent research has showed the other, that we can increase empathy. We can actually increase that and get people to care. It is possible, which is essential for putting the people first and buying into the why of the organization in the corporate sense. So, thanks for that.
Cool, thank you. Prof. Nick?
Yeah, thank you. So, firstly, again, thanks for inviting me. And again, to Claudia, the plaudit of doing, not just thinking about this. There's lots to say, and I think we're closing, so let me just share a couple of. I liked your go-getter. Resilience I get. I get South Africans are resilient. If you look at how most of our people live, we are resilient people. But there's something else that's needed, and that is to change the game, and to go first, and to innovate. And that's why I like the phrase go-getter. I remember a lovely quote from Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my friends what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. This country has had extraordinary pioneers in business, in academia, in political life. I mean, if you think we never talk about Madiba. It's astonishing to me. The most admired man in the world. We don't talk about him. And I look at his life and his courage, because that's where the go-getting comes from. The go-getter is to look in the mirror and say, I'll go first. It's what they train the military guys to do. But I want to end, if I can, just with something you mentioned about the rugby. I went to 2 games that I couldn't afford any of the more expensive tickets. I came home and watched with you probably on the TV. And remember Cheslin going off the field and draping the flag over his head. Do you remember that? And when we won, I mean, none of us, I still crawl when I just think of how it happened. 3 games, 1 minute, 1 point. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But when the final whistle ran, if you go watch it at the end, Sia was on the bench also. And he went onto the field and then he turned around to fetch Cheslin. And I can't think of a better image than that. That's real leadership. Let me say one last thing. I'm not sure we've really learned we need each other yet. I grew up in the old order, in which clearly we didn't like or know or need each other. We're in the beginning of a new order, and I think we're still discovering each other. And we have huge gifts to give each other. Now, I travel a hell of a lot, and I go to monocultural countries, and I go to multicultural countries. And every time a coconut, I want to be in the multicultural country. Why? Because it's not a reflection of me. And I can see the dynamic of different people. When I think about South Africa's people, if we just find out what we could give each other, we'd be unstoppable. And for me, that's what the Amapopo represented. I think there's a new Afrikaans word. It was invented on the East Rand. You know the East Rand, Benoni. The word of Benoni and Foxburg comes from there. It's a new Afrikaans word. It's genuine. That's an Afrikaans word. And if each of us bring our genuine skill to this thing, I mean, to think of the business people and the religious leaders, you know, the Tutus and the Mandelas and the Elon Musk this country has brought about. I think we still have 30 to 50 years to go, but what a great journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Wonderful, beautiful. Thank you. While Marlene gets herself ready, Claudio's book is at the back there if you're interested to have it. You'll also sign it, am I right, if you do want him to do that. Thank you so much for your conversations, and that's what Leaders in Conversations is wanting to do. It's have these conversations, and maybe you learned something in your little group that wasn't even said up there. But it was worthwhile, and it's a takeaway. So thank you so much from my side for being here. I'm going to ask Marlene to wrap up for us and close, please. Thank you.
I think we have something over here, Claudia.
Amo, have you done the?
Amo?
You mean the nerve-wracking task that I was
The
Yes,
nerve-wracking
please.
task that we assigned to you.
So, friends, what I have decided to do, since there are 2 lists on here, and I do not want to be accused of favoring a particular individual who will be a worthy recipient of this token of appreciation from us as a team, I have decided that I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to pick a name. And wherever this marker lands, that will be the worthy recipient of this token of
Thank you.
appreciation. Watch it. All right, and I also accept gifts if you would like to sway this decision. All right. Brent. Oh, it says Brent Sussman. Yeah, it says Brent Sussman.
Well done.
I can't eat it. Oh, lovely.
Can you come up for a photograph?
Wow, seriously. I didn't dress for this. This is lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna.
I'm supposed to be on diet.
It is incredible. She's very, very talented.
No.
I
So,
think voluntary subordination means gifting.
I'm not that transcendental.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this evening and for participating in the event. I know that there's been so much knowledge that's been transferred here this evening, and I think we all have some incredible takeaways that we can take to apply in our lives, in our businesses, and in our leadership. For me personally, when I was reading Claudio's book in preparation for, and also happened to be my first read of the year, was that, and I think we touched on it, that sometimes we have experience within a corporate environment, within a business environment, and we take those experiences and that's how we learn to lead. We see, we steal with the eye, we have some transfer of skills, and that's how we get it. And so when I read his book, one of the things that was impactful for me was that Claudio allows us and he provides us with the vocabulary to put words to some of these practices that we've had and have practiced in our business for many, many years. And that for me was empowering. I think the second takeaway for me was that we cannot lead in silos. And very often, if we look at the wounded leader, that is what we do because we compartmentalize as individuals, and we're good at that. But as leaders, we should be seeking something that is more integrated. And I think Claudio's book also brings that to the fore to say that we need an integrated approach to leadership. And it has to go beyond only the business, the transferring of skills, the teams, but also the higher self. And I think the important point for me was, Professor Benedel, that you made was that as leaders, we should be in a position to accept evolution and be part of that evolution and evolve as the world changes. So thank you again for this profound impact that you have shared here this evening for us to shape our organizations and our institutions. I think the conversation today, again, it's shed the light on just the evolution of the landscape of leadership and emphasizing that need for that fresh perspective. And it's one that resonates, with the challenges that we face in our present day, as we've heard this evening. So Claudio and Professor Benedel, your contributions have been invaluable, and I would like to thank both of you for your participation and for sharing your knowledge so selflessly here this evening with us. Claudio, again, your book, Rise of the Warrior Leader, it's just underscored that the essential qualities of resilience and being an adaptive leader. And it's just absolutely spot on, so incredible, well done. And Professor Benedel, your extensive experience in business and education, it shines through this evening, offering profound insights just into the needs for that leadership reset and a different way of thinking. And I really appreciate how you also took us and reminded us of the Gen Z generation, because I think sometimes as leaders they sort of fall by the wayside. But thank you for bringing that to our attention. I would like to now extend a gratitude to Boundless Leadership Team. Jeanette, where are you? Jeanette Head. There you are. Thank you so much. Amo Malotto, thank you for taking on tasks during the event and bestowing that beautiful masterpiece on our winner this evening. And lastly, Jocelyn Stevens and also Mike Saharn. Mike, there you are, I see you. Thank you so much. And lastly, last but not least, Crispin Swart, our host this evening. Crispin, thank you very much for being the pillar that really cemented the conversation and drove the thought-provoking thoughts and ideas this evening that empowered everyone that joined us. Thank you so much for facilitating, and thank you so much for the event. So as we leave here this evening, everyone, I think that we can feel empowered and we can utilize everything that we've learned here this evening, not only in our place of business, but also within that warrior leadership within us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.